Hi everybody, I'm Mai Mai. I am a trans woman, a storyteller, a creative director, and someone who spent a long time learning how to live in a world that seems to accept people like me less and less every day. This channel is called Whispers of Self. It is my reflective podcast where I discuss what it's like to move through the world as a transgender woman. Some of what I share will be deeply personal, political, gently philosophical, but ultimately these are my opinions that are shaped by my lived experience and research intended to be better understanding of a complex world. So whether you're trans, questioning, a quiet ally, or just curious in good faith, you're all welcome here. Because this channel is not only about transness, it is about that whispering ghost that dwells within everyone, guiding them to their most authentic selves. Welcome to Whispers of Self. There's a difference between being tolerated and being accepted. Most people never have to think about that difference, but if you're trans, it could become a part of your everyday life. It can show up in your doctor's office visits, your workplace, your friendships, and even often in your own family. Tolerance might sound positive because it's certainly better than open hate, but in practice, tolerance is often a quiet form of rejection. It says, I will deal with the fact that you exist, but only if you don't make me uncomfortable. That conditional permission can be suffocating. It's the friend who says that they always support you, but they quietly stop inviting you to events after you start wearing dresses. Or it's the family member who swears up and down that they love and support you no matter what, and yet they always still seem to misgender you to other people. They introduce you with your dead name at family events, and if you correct them, they always seem to say, we're trying. But this is hard for us. Each of these remarks starts with a veneer of acceptance, only to tack on this anxious, but that reveals the speaker's unexamined discomfort. This is what happens when someone doesn't want to seem like a bigot, yet also refuses to confront the bias and fear they still carry inside. They perform tolerance, just enough to feel open-minded, while their deeper unease seeps through these sideways comments and caveats. Such performative tolerance is not the same as true inclusion. In effect, it's a performance of support that keeps me at a safe distance. I'm being othered with a smile instead of a slur, and the burden of this quiet prejudice falls on me and trans people like me to carry. We're expected to be grateful for even being tolerated at all, to take half-hearted compliments or qualified acceptance and not make a fuss. I often catch myself doing exactly that, forcing a gracious smile, saying thank you, because if I do push back, if I say, hey, that actually feels insulting, or I try to explore why they're concerned about trans people in the first place, I become the problem. In their eyes, I'm overreacting or ruining the amicable vibe. They might get defensive and say, well, I was just trying to be nice. Why are you so sensitive? And so I usually let it pass. I stay quiet to protect their comfort at the cost of my own. This is the twisted little dance that conditional acceptance demands from marginalized folks. Be glad we let you in the room at all, and don't you dare make us uncomfortable in return. These subtle behaviors, the microaggressions, backhanded compliments, and coded doubts are not harmless. They accumulate as soft harm that can be just as psychologically damaging as overt discrimination. In other words, those little I support you but messages we hear every day are not so little in their impact. They are quiet insults and doubts that begin to nibble away at a person's sense of self and safety. Over time, that quiet violence of conditional welcome can wear you down even more than outright hostility, precisely because it's harder to name and fight. You start second-guessing yourself. Am I being too sensitive? Did I imagine that insult? Because on the surface, everyone seems to insist that they're fine with me. Tolerance puts a pressure on me to behave a certain way. I feel like it's something I could lose in the blink of an eye if I speak up too much or express myself too much. This captures the insecurity that comes with being merely tolerated, the nagging knowledge that the warmth that people show you is conditional, revocable even if you step out of line. One wrong move, one honest expression of your needs or frustrations, and the thin support, that thin veil you have, could vanish. The mental and emotional toll of living in this limbo is very real. Tolerance is not neutral. It often comes with a significant cost. I often feel exhausted by it, and I'm not alone. Researchers confirm what trans people know from experience, that feeling tolerated instead of acceptance is linked to worse health outcomes. A 2017 study in the Journal of Gay and Lesbian Mental Health found that trans folks who perceived their community as not tolerant had significantly higher rates of depression than those who felt their community was supportive. In fact, the difference was so striking, not being in a tolerant environment was associated with roughly 2 to 3 times greater likelihood of depressive symptoms. Imagine spending every day navigating spaces where you know you're only grudgingly allowed to be there. It's no wonder it wears on your mental health. Being conditionally welcome means that you're constantly scanning for the next bit of rejection cloaked in politeness. It keeps you on edge, and it often forces trans people to police ourselves in the hopes of preserving others' fragile tolerance. If you demand any kind of change, then you're suddenly an obstruction. And I guess that tolerance can be very easily revoked. The message that we receive is very clear. Keep yourself small, don't be too demanding, play by their rules, or you'll be out. It's important to realize that this dynamic, conditional acceptance with strings attached, is not unique to trans people. It's a common pattern in how society deals with many marginalized groups. We've seen it with gay and lesbian people. Well, I don't mind them as long as they don't flaunt it. With immigrants, sure, come here for a better life, but speak English and don't make us adapt to your culture. And we of course see it with people of color. People saying, well, yeah, of course we're happy to include you, just don't ever bring up race. In each case, the dominant group offers a token inclusion that appears polite while quietly enforcing their comfort as the priority. Sociologists describe this as maintaining social boundaries under the guise of tolerance. The marginalized person is partially accepted, allowed into mainstream spaces, but only on the condition that they don't disturb the status quo. In a study of Christian attitudes towards LGBTQ folks, researchers noted that many congregants conform to the broader social patterns of tolerance, while maintaining negative appraisals of queer people. In plainer terms, overt hate was no longer socially acceptable to those folks, so they embraced a softer prejudice, treating LGBTQ individuals as sympathetic victims rather than fully equal beings. They'll say things like, well, I pray for them and I hold no hate in my heart, but still deny that LGBTQ people are normal or deserving of the same rights. And it's their way to look virtuous in public while quietly clinging to the belief that their group is superior or more valid. This difference in treatment may be subtle, but it partially accepts the marginalized while still keeping them in a box, firmly separate from true or full acceptance. For trans people, this pattern often manifests as the infamous good trans versus bad trans dichotomy. A good trans woman, in the eyes of tolerant society, is one who doesn't challenge too much. She may undergo full medical transition, try her best to pass as cisgender, stay relatively quiet about her rights, and gratefully accept a limited place in society that's been conceded to her. If she meets those conditions, she'll be tolerated, maybe even praised, for how well she fits in. But if a trans woman refuses or fails to meet those strict expectations, for example, she doesn't pass as cis, or she speaks up about trans rights, or she simply exists in ways that demands others to adjust their thinking, then she quickly is labeled as bad trans, and all tolerance evaporates. This false dichotomy creates an illusion that society is generous and unbiased. After all, we accept the good ones, while still marginalizing anyone who doesn't stay meek and palatable. As writer Madison Stoff points out, this lets individual transphobes claim that since they're happy to provisionally accept certain good trans people, they can't be seen to have a problem with trans folks overall. I find this to be a very convenient bit of self-deception. I'm not a bigot. I tolerate some of you, So if I object to you in particular, the problem must be you, not my prejudice. This tactic is often used to dismiss or silence trans perspectives that make cis people uneasy or call for real change. The moment a trans person says something that requires introspection from others, something that challenges a deeply held belief or asks for an accommodation, the tolerators bristle. They retreat behind, well, I've got nothing against trans people. I just wish they would stop talking about it. This is going way too far. In essence, they hold their acceptance hostage. Behave the way I want, and I'll treat you decently. But if you step out of line, all bets are off. This is why I call tolerance a quiet violence. It's quiet because it's often unspoken or couched in friendly language, but it's violence in the way it erodes our dignity and sense of security. It keeps trans people and others in a perpetual state of contingency. It also shuts down true dialogue, because when someone believes they're already tolerant and accepting, they often get defensive at any suggestion that they might harbor any bias or need to do better. Tolerance can act like a defense mechanism that prevents critical reflection and shuts the whole conversation down. People will use their token tolerance as proof of their open-mindedness, often saying things like, live and let live. So if trans folks point out lingering issues or ask for deeper understanding, the tolerators often respond with dismissal or even anger. In this way, tolerance can become an obstacle to progress. In an equitable society, there wouldn't be tolerance, there would be dialogue. My belief is that true equality requires engagement and change, not just a grudging allowance of someone's presence. Tolerance, by contrast, asks nothing of the person granting it except that they refrain from hostility. It lets them pat themselves on the back for being not a bigot without actually challenging any of their underlying prejudices or increasing their understanding. And as long as those biases remain unexamined, they will continue to surface in policy and behavior. We can see how a tolerance-only climate lays a foundation for more overt attacks on trans rights. If society at large is content with trans people existing, but only on strict terms, it's not a huge leap for opportunistic voices to push rolling back even that basic tolerance. Consider for a moment how many people will proclaim support for trans folks' general rights to safety or employment, yet in that same breath argue that trans women should be banned from women's sports or bathrooms, or that trans teens should not be allowed medical care. In a recent Pew Research Center survey, a strong majority of Americans, 64%, that they favor laws protecting trans people from job or housing discrimination. Sounding supportive in principle, but 58% of those same respondents also supported policies that excluded trans women from women's athletic teams. It is the same tolerance until it inconveniences me outlook. We accept you, but not if it means changing our institutions or expectations. This lukewarm support creates an opening for anti-trans activists to step in and stoke those latent discomforts. And they'll often say things like, see, even reasonable people have concerns about these trans issues. We're just answering those concerns. And because the general public's acceptance was only ever surface deep, then a lot of regular people get swayed. Prejudiced ideas can slip through draped in the language of just asking questions or reasonable concerns. We've seen this with other YouTube figures like Sasha Ayad, a pretty well-known gender-critical therapist who presents herself as a neutral, thoughtful voice on gender issues, who leverages the existing doubts in a tolerant but unaccepting society. She and others in the so-called gender-critical movement often speak in a calm, educated tone that makes their trans-skeptical stance sound very reasonable. And it finds an eager audience because so many people are already uncomfortable with trans folks, but they don't want to seem cruel. For those people, someone like Ayad or a certain well-known author, it gives them permission to indulge their doubts while still feeling like they're being thoughtful and not hateful. It's tolerance eroding back into intolerance under the cover of rational debate. As my community has learned the hard way, loving the sinner and hating the sin does tend to often devolve into just hate for the sinner, only now that hate wears an intellectual mask. So where do we go from here? We deserve better than tolerance. I say that as someone who has lived on both sides of that line. I have been tolerated in plenty of spaces, and I have been accepted in a precious few. Because tolerance lets you exist, but acceptance invites you in. And when you're truly accepted, you can definitely feel it. You're not an outsider or a problem to be solved. You're just another human being who belongs. I remember the first time I experienced genuine acceptance from a friend after coming out. And I remember the way I gradually stopped bracing myself whenever trans topics came up, the way I could talk about my life without watching their face for that flicker of discomfort or judgment. I realized I had been holding my breath in so many different interactions, and now I could just finally breathe. That is the quiet bliss of no longer walking on eggshells. Acceptance is what actually heals, because it tells a person they can show up as their authentic self without constantly risking rejection. To anyone listening who wants to be an ally, please don't stop at tolerance, because tolerance is passive. It asks nothing of you except to basically not openly harass me. It asks you to listen, to unlearn some ingrained biases, and maybe to be a bit uncomfortable as you grow. It means seeing me, or any trans person for that matter, not as a disruption or an exception, but as a person with a valid experience, even if it's one you didn't initially understand. So thanks for sticking around with me through this very long video. This channel is very new and I'm still getting my sea legs moving, so to speak, but I really hope for this to become a place where I can talk about my own shared experiences that I know so many trans people, maybe specifically trans women, can relate to, but also talk about those issues in a way that anybody should be able to relate to. I myself have navigated a very complicated world for the last 30 plus years, and I think it's built on experiences that we all share, regardless of being trans, straight, cis, otherwise. And I would love for this to become a unifying message that can reach many audiences. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends if you found it valuable. Every like counts, and I really appreciate the support. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you soon.